Okay. We got into our discussion of ketubot because we're talking about the laws of inheritance, beginning from the Benos Tzlafchad. And what we learned was that women, wives in particular, are excluded from the laws of inheritance, meaning that a wife does not inherit from her husband, which in secular law is what happens. A wife does not inherit from her husband, and a woman does not inherit from her father if there are sons. But we're focusing particularly on a wife not inheriting from her husband. If a wife doesn't inherit from her husband and her husband passes away, so the question is, what happens to the wife? Okay, is she left to fend for herself? Or are there resources that are set aside in order to be able to continue in some way her to be able to live without radically changing her life? So that's what we're really going to focus on, because I think the question is, if a wife doesn't inherit from the husband, which is something that we're all accustomed to, right? In our tradition, it's almost like, and when I say in our tradition, I'm meaning in American law, it's sort of like a no-brainer that the wife inherits from the husband. Because God forbid the husband passes away, so the wife inherits. That is absolutely against halacha, right? That's not what happens in halacha. And we will ultimately, I don't think we'll get to it today, but we'll ultimately try to understand how one is able to resolve the conflict between halacha and what we do, right? What we do according to not only secular law, but what we do according to the choices that we make, right? Pretty much, I don't know if there's anyone today who would have his entire estate go to his children and have nothing go to his wife. And if that's the case, which is keneged halacha, so then how do we resolve this conflict between what halacha requires of us and what we might want to do or what we might do in accordance with secular law? Okay, so that's where we're ultimately going to go. But let's first of all begin to look about how was a woman provided for when she got married. So understand, we are looking at things through the eyes of March 2022. Right? The eyes of March 22, looking back at pre-Talmudic times, doesn't always jive, right? Doesn't always make sense to us. So I don't want you to judge things based on how we would look at them today. I want you to try to put yourself in the time frame of what was occurring society-wise in those days, and we'll hopefully bring it up to speed. So we learned, if you remember, sometime near the end of last week's class, we learned that provisions of a husband for his wife took the form of something called a mohar. Right? What was the mohar? So we translated it as dowry at the time, but dowry in classical understanding, dowry is what the wife brings into the relationship. So it's not really a dowry, but it is what's referred to in, I guess, literature about this as the bride's gift. It was a gift that was given either to the bride or to the family of the bride. And it was a gift on which the marriage was based. So think back to all the instances that we looked at the source. Rashi brings this, do you remember where? Rashi brings this in the discussion of Shechem and Yaakov and the siblings. Okay, because what did Shechem say? Shechem basically said, name your price, right? Name your price. Whatever size gift you want in order for me to be able to marry your daughter, excuse me, I'm prepared to pay. So that's the context within which Rashi mentions this term of mohar. However, it's not an unusual concept. Think about when Eliezer came down to find a wife for Yitzchak, and he came across Rivka. What did he do? Gave her jewelry, right? Bracelets, nose rings, whatever was popular in those days. Gave her all of these things. Now, he literally gave these things to her, but who were they going to? Who was acquiring them? Her father obviously was acquiring them. That the family was acquiring them, but he gave them to her. That's the bride's gift, if you will. And we saw that tradition. We see that tradition over and over again, right? When Yaakov flees his brother Esav and comes running down, right, to find a wife, and Lavan comes out to greet him. What is Lavan looking for? Lavan is looking for gifts, right? Unfortunately, Yaakov isn't coming with any gifts because everything was taken away from him by Eliphaz on his journey down to Haran. So Yaakov arrives without any gifts. Okay, Yaakov arrives without any gifts, but he doesn't marry without a bride's gift. What is he essentially doing as a bride's gift? Working. He's working. He's doing menial labor, right? 7 years in order to marry Rachel, who he thought he was going to marry, right? 7 years to marry Rachel, and then in addition, right, who turned out to be Leah, and then an additional 7 years to marry Rachel. Yaakov didn't have any money. He didn't have anything to give as a bride's gift, and as a result of that, he needed to work, his menial labor. That's what Yaakov did. That was his work. That was his gift to the family in order to be able to marry these women. So we do have this concept going back to biblical days of something known as the mohar, which was the gift, the bride's gift given by the husband to either the bride or to the bride's family. Now, that mohar, according to many, transformed over the years. Because think about it, what would happen? What would happen is if I was required to give a gift to a bride or to a bride's family before getting married, and I was a young man starting out in the world, and I didn't really have a parnasa, or I was sitting and learning, I didn't come from a wealthy family, what was I not going to be able to afford? I was not going to be able to afford to give this gift, to give this bride's gift, to the person, to the woman I'm hoping to marry. So in order to in some way compensate for that, it seems that there was a process whereby the mohar got transformed from a gift to the bride at the time of marriage to an obligation to the bride that would be a debt collected at the termination of marriage. Okay, you hear that transformation, right? From a gift to the bride at the beginning of marriage to an obligation, a debt to the bride to be collected at the termination of marriage. Okay, that was the transformation of the mohar. Okay, now.
Pre-Talmudic times, are you talking about?
Pre-Talmudic times?
Yeah.
Exactly when this transformation occurred is not clear, right? It's not clear. But at a particular point, this transformation occurred. And it therefore became a statement of indebtedness that the husband made to his wife. Now, whenever there is a statement of indebtedness, whenever there is indebtedness between two people, what does there need to be in order to collect on that indebtedness? There needs to be a document. There needs to be a document that attests to this indebtedness. In other words, if I go before the court and I say, by the way, my brother owes me $1 million, what is the court going to say? Court's going to say, okay, prove it, right? Prove it. So what am I going to bring as proof? either I am going to bring witnesses who have seen that my brother loaned me $1 million and they're willing to testify in court that my brother loaned me $1 million, or I'm going to have a document which also requires witnesses attesting to the fact that my brother loaned me $1 million. Right? Is that what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
Right? And he's trying to collect from me. Right? He's trying to collect from me. So in any matter of indebtedness, there needs to be a document. So one of the functions of your ketubah is a document of indebtedness. That this document entitles you to collect on the debt that your husband owes you upon termination of the marriage. Now, here's the question, right? It's one thing to collect a debt that is owed during a person's lifetime. Okay? So if the marriage terminates through divorce, okay. So the husband is still alive, and when you collect the debt, what do you collect the debt from? You collect the debt from the husband's assets. But what if the husband dies? What happens to those assets? When a husband
So
dies,
they're inherited by the designated beneficiaries.
they're
as it is in the
inherited by
Bible.
his heirs, right? They're inherited by his heirs. What's happening to the husband's entire estate? To whom is that estate going?
His
To
children.
his? No.
Any male heirs that
Right? We'll operate within a halachic framework right now. We're going to operate solely within a halachic framework. That his entire estate is going to his sons. So now, for the woman to collect this indebtedness, which is owed to her, to where against what does she claim that indebtedness? Against the
Against her
estate
sons.
of her sons, right? And these actually might not even be her sons. It's possible that they're not her sons,
Right.
right? Maybe they're her,
Could be a second
right?
wife.
Maybe they're her stepchildren. Right?
Right.
It's possible they're not even her sons, and yet her claim of indebtedness is against the estate, which is now owned by the sons of the husband who died. If the husband's still alive, if he divorces her, so then she collects directly from the husband, from the estate, from the husband, not from the estate, from the assets of the husband. But if the marriage terminates because he dies and she becomes a widow, her indebtedness is collected from the estate. That's an important thing to remember. Because when we talk about how an estate is distributed, the first distribution of an estate is to pay indebtedness. Okay? So it's not like the woman is left having to negotiate, among the conflict among the siblings, right? The sons of this husband who passed away, because even before they inherit anything, or even before they walk away with anything, if you will, the estate is obligated to pay its indebtedness. And the indebtedness is paid to the woman. This is how things are set up in a halachic manner. They don't function this way today, but that's how they're set up in a halachic manner. So questions so far on just what we've said.
just to
Tina, go ahead.
clarify, a man passes away.
You're frozen.
I'm frozen? I'm sorry.
It's freezing the estate.
Okay, hopefully we will thaw out. Is that what you mean, Beverly? Beverly, you're now better? Okay, go ahead.
How's the back?
Just to clarify, a man passes away, he really owes his wife from his assets, correct?
Well, his assets are now his estate. A man passes away.
And she has to be paid off, right?
She has to be paid from the estate before the estate is distributed to the sons of the man who died.
Okay, that's
But Rabbi,
Yes, Beverly.
Doesn't it make a difference if the children are minor or adults?
Does it make a difference whether the children are minor or adults? It makes a difference for the children, right? It makes a difference for the children. It doesn't make a difference for the woman. Because let's say the estate is $5 million and the woman is owed, I'm just going to throw out a number, $1 million. So the only thing that's going to be distributed to the children is $4 million. So whether they're adults or minors, that has to do with the distribution to the children, but it doesn't impact on her. It doesn't impact on the woman because she is getting this $1 million before anything else happens. So one of the functions of the Kesuba is to serve as a document of indebtedness. To serve as a document of indebtedness. Now, what was the rationale behind this transition from the mohar given at the time of marriage, this bride's gift, which was given at the time of marriage, to an indebtedness that was collectible, is that the word, collectible? At the time of termination of the marriage. So we mentioned that one of the elements behind it was to enable young men who didn't have the means to provide a gift that would be appropriate, to enable them to marry and to postpone the obligation, the payment of this gift until a time down the road when they had accumulated more assets that could indeed be used to pay this indebtedness. But there's another reason which the Gemara in Maseches Ksubos hints at.
Stabilizes the marriage.
And what is that? What do you mean it stabilizes the marriage?
It's not easy for the man if he has to pay an amount for divorce just to get up and leave and take another wife.
Okay, let's clarify just a little bit of what Raylene was saying. Raylene says it stabilizes the marriage. The Gemara in Maseches Ksubos brings a similar idea, doesn't use the phrase to stabilize the marriage, but brings a similar idea as follows. The Gemara in Maseches Ksubos says that the establishment of the Ksuba was to make it more difficult for a husband to divorce his wife. Remember, according to, before the Takana of Rabbeinu Gershom, a husband didn't need to divorce his wife before marrying another woman. He could have 2 wives or 3 wives or 5 wives, right? It didn't matter. But what the Gemara was referring to is making it more difficult for the husband to divorce his wife. Why would the Gemara be concerned about making it more difficult for the husband to divorce his wife? Why does the Gemara care about that?
Well, it was an agrarian economy. She had no skills. Where would she go?
I mean, yes, okay, that, you're talking about from a practical perspective, yes.
The maternity of the sons, in other words, it made it clear which children came from which father. If you didn't have that document and he was able to marry or have children with a variety of people, you could run into problems.
Well, the document doesn't prevent him from having children with a variety of women. He could have children with multiple women. He could have multiple wives. He could have concubines, right?
But every one of them is going to require a ketubah.
Every wife is going to require a ketubah, but not right. The Pelakshot, the concubines, did not require a ketubah.
So what happened if he had children by, I guess you would call it an illegitimate relationship? Would those children be allowed to marry? If it's a Jewish woman.
Remember, an illegitimate relationship is defined as a relationship with a married woman to whom you are not married.
Okay.
Right? That's, in other words, a relationship not within the framework of a wedding that produces offspring. Mm-hmm. Those offspring are not considered illegitimate, despite the fact that he's married to another woman. those offspring are not considered illegitimate. They do have a claim to inherit him. They are his children, his sons. They do have a claim to inherit him, but they're not illegitimate, and they can marry whomever they want to marry.
The wife has no claim. The woman who gave birth to them has no claim.
The woman who gave birth to them has no claim unless there's a ksuba, right? She has no claim. That's the ksuba. So let's just focus a little bit. I just want to fine tune a little bit what Raylene said, that the Gemara says it made it difficult for a husband to divorce his wife. It took the capriciousness out of a divorce, right? Because remember, at least according to, from a biblical perspective, and as was practiced in a society where there were batei din, if a husband wanted to divorce his wife because she burned dinner, he was able to He was able to divorce his wife because she burned dinner. He was able to do that. That was his halachic right. He had the halachic right to do that. Now, obviously, as the Beit Din system and society changed, that was less and less likely to happen. But the ksuba was established. In other words, the indebtedness of the ksuba, I don't want to talk about the document itself, but the indebtedness of the ksuba was established in order to make this more difficult. How does it make it more difficult? Well, imagine if I've already set aside a sum of money that's over here, or a parcel of land that's over here that is designated as the gift to my wife. So then, you know what? In my head, it's already been set aside. It's already been given. It's no longer mine. So if I divorce her, okay, you know what? I need to pay her, but it was already out of my framework, if you will. What's that word? My Weltanschauung. It was already out of my framework. It's over there. Interestingly, you know, and this is the brilliance of Chazal. If you separate out 10% of your income for tzedakah, and you put it in a particular place, when it comes time to give that tzedakah, you don't feel like it's hurting you, right? Because it's already been set aside. So the same thing would apply to this indebtedness to a woman. If the money was already set aside, right? The money was already in an account with her name, or the property had already been deeded to her, or whatever arrangements had been made, and the husband is, she burned the dinner again, right? So in his mind, I don't really have to give her any money because I gave it to her already. But if instead of that money having been set aside from the beginning, there is now an indebtedness, what cheshbon does the husband need to make? The husband needs to say, oh, wait a second here, right? What is this going to cost me, right? She burned dinner, right? Right? But if I divorce her, what is this going to cost me, right? And that was precisely the cheshbon that Chazal put into place. That now there's an indebtedness that she's going to collect from his assets if he divorces her. So that makes him hesitant to divorce her. Why? Because it's human nature that there are times when couples, I don't know, maybe it doesn't apply to any of you. I'll just speak from personal experience. There are times when couples sometimes get angry at each other, right? And sometimes say things that might be inappropriate to each other. And imagine if all you needed to do was to sign a get, kick her out of the house. Who knows what would be. So the Gemara tells us that the indebtedness was put into place in order to counter that that kind of behavior, right? That capriciousness of the husband. Okay.
What happens if a woman comes from a poor family and she doesn't have the mohar, she doesn't have the wherewithal to give a gift?
No,
She
that's-
gave
Baruch atah
something.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekol niyeh b'doro.
He had to give
Okay.
her.
The mohar that we're talking about is the gift that he gave to her or her family. That's why it now becomes his indebtedness to her. Because we transferred, right? It got transferred from the beginning of the marriage to the end of the marriage, right? That's when it got transferred. I apologize. I'm sorry. Right? Got transferred from the beginning of the marriage to the end of the marriage. Okay, that's what happened, and that's why there's a difference. So one of the reasons given is to make it less likely that a husband will divorce his wife based on a temporary insanity, right? Based on a mood disorder, based on whatever, okay? So we have, in order to enable marriages to occur at a younger age, in order to create a stability within the relationship that will weather the normal back and forth that sometimes happens in a relationship. One final interesting idea, which is given what this indebtedness does and why it's moved to the end of the marriage, is to actually make it easier for the woman to remarry. Right? Think about it for a second, right? That if a marriage ends and a woman walks away with a sum of money, with some assets, it makes her more attractive to another potential husband. First of all, she can now contribute. Her family might not, her parents might not be alive anymore. Her family might not be alive for them to contribute a dowry anymore. So she now has something to put on the table, something to bring to a second marriage, as opposed to what would happen if she left the marriage without any resources. How challenging would it be for her to remarry? So there's another aspect built into the ksuba of of creating a scenario that would facilitate her remarriage. Because we don't,
Rabbi Paul,
hang on just a second, we don't envision, we don't envision a state where a woman is either divorced or widowed, and that situation continues. We don't envision it among women, and we don't envision it among men. Yes, obviously sometimes it happens, and different societies there are different cultural values, right? Different societies have different cultural values, but from a traditional perspective, it's not something that we encourage. Okay? Question. Who had a question online?
I just wanted to ask, so what if he's somebody that's holding off from giving a get? So then the other thing remains moot until he gives the get, no?
The idea.
So,
Because he's holding off.
so
He's holding
Rosie is asking if a husband refuses to give a get, does this indebtedness kick in? And the answer is no. The indebtedness only kicks in at the time of get. Right now, again, Rosie, we're talking about, from a purely halachic perspective. We're not talking about secular law. We're not talking about modern day society. We're not talking about prenuptial agreements or anything like that. Right? We're not talking about that. Okay. So purpose of the ksuba number one is to create an indebtedness for those three reasons: to facilitate marriage, to create a stability within marriage, and to facilitate remarriage. Raylene, go ahead.
Also a proof of marriage, because after the temple construction with the disbursement of people traveling all over, I mean, how would you know if a man appeared in a town with a woman that she was indeed his wife? That he didn't have.
So Raylene is suggesting nicely. Raylene is suggesting that the ksuba also served as a proof of marriage, right? The ksuba also served as a proof of marriage, but a proof of marriage that would be beneficial to the woman. I'm assuming that's what you're saying, right? A proof of marriage that would be beneficial to the woman. Correct, right? Correct. Okay.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi?
Yes, go ahead. Shireen, go
Does
ahead.
moher mean, does have a meaning? Is it like Hebrew? Is it Aramaic? Mohar. What you say, the word.
Mohar is Aramaic. Mohar is Aramaic.
You know, it's very interesting because the Muslims have the same concepts for their marriages, and
Correct.
they call it mehriye, and they give number of content like by coins, like 50 gold coins, or 100 gold coins, or 1,000 gold coins. That's how they do it. They
Correct.
got it
It's the
from
same.
us,
It's the
other-
correct. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. And the idea of a bride's gift, was not. It was something that was very prevalent in society. It's not something that was unique to Judaism. It was something very prevalent in society. But Shireen, you're right. The word demonstrates the similarity, right, between the two concepts. Okay, Sue.
At what point did it become like beyond just a document, where if you didn't have it or you couldn't find it, it was a crucial thing to replace?
Okay, so let's understand. So while it's still a document, why would Chazal legislate that if a woman doesn't have her ksuba, if her ksuba is lost, or if her ksuba is destroyed, that she is not allowed to live together with her husband? Why would Chazal legislate such a rule? For whose protection? For the woman's protection. Why? Right?
She's vulnerable.
She's vulnerable, right? She has no proof to this indebtedness of her husband. So if she has no proof to this indebtedness of her husband, then she is indeed vulnerable, and she needs to, as quickly as possible, acquire another ksuba, right? And there's a document called a ksuba de irchasa, which is a document written as a replacement for a lost or destroyed ksuba. And she needs to acquire that as quickly as possible. What is the one way that we have to ensure that this will happen quickly, ladies?
A weapon?
What's the what? Yes, correct. What is, Raylene, what is that weapon?
You can't sleep with it.
Okay?
I called it a weapon.
All right.
Is that okay?
Right? In other words, the idea, right? The idea that a woman is unavailable to her husband is going to serve as a motivation to him to go ahead and recreate this ksuba, recreate this document of indebtedness.
What did you say the second one is called? The
Ksuba de irchasa. De irchasa. Again, an Aramaic word. Ksuba de
One
irchasa.
other question. At a get, where you say Harayat Megoreshedli, what happens?
Nobody
then
says
to
Harayat
whatever?
Begoreshously. Yes.
You know
Go ahead. Yeah.
What happens to that?
The document, the ksuba is surrendered. Right? The ksuba is surrendered to the Beis Din. Why is the ksuba surrendered to the Beis Din? Why? The question was, what happens to the ksuba at the time of a get? The ksuba is surrendered to the Beis Din. Why? Because a document of indebtedness is destroyed after the debt has been paid, or it is acquired, it's taken out of the hands of the person to whom the indebtedness is owed. Because otherwise, it could theoretically be used again. Right? It could be theoretically used again. So the ksuba is brought to the gittin procedure. It's brought to the procedure. It's brought as a function to clarify the details of the marriage, and it is generally retained by the Beis Din. Generally retained by the Beis Din. They store it, they destroy it, whatever they do. They tear up the get. The actual get is cut, but they could cut up the ksuba or something like that. Thelma, go ahead.
Rabbi Barkov, I'm a little bit confused with this. From what I grew up, the Middle Eastern people, when they had daughters, it was like a problem because they had to
Oh, they had to buy the man. Correct.
We didn't get to buying the man yet. We're gonna
It's like buying a husband
we're gonna
for
talk
that.
we're gonna talk about buying the man. We didn't get to buying the man yet. Right? Buying the man's a whole nother discussion.
But
Right?
it's not the man buying her. The man just gives her a ring or something.
No. All right. Let's not confuse. Let's not confuse things, okay? And this is a tendency that people have. I think we mentioned it last week, that there is a Mishnah that says that a woman can be acquired. All right? Please don't pass moral judgment on that word. A woman can be acquired in one of three ways. Kesef, right, which is the man giving the woman an object of value, which today most people use a ring. Syrians actually use a coin, right? They actually use a coin, but most people use most weddings occur with the medium of a ring. Giving a woman an object of value. It need not be a ring. It can be any object of value as long as it has an agreed upon value, right? As long as it has agreed upon value. One of the reasons why we have wedding bands that don't have stones in them is because having a stone in a band, right, having precious stones creates a question as to the real value of what you are being given. You know, who's evaluating the stones? Are they real? Are they fake? Are they grade A? Are they grade B? Are they grade C? Right? It creates a question mark about the value of what you are being given. There needs to be clarity on the value of what you are being given. Right? There's clarity to a gold band. There's clarity as to, or a platinum band. There's clarity as to what that value is. That's why, so that's number one, kesef. The second is shtar. What is shtar? Shtar is a document of proposal, right? A document of proposal. So for instance, when the chassan places the ring on the kala's finger, he says, Harei at mikudeshes li bitaba'as zo, with this ring.
You have to witness.
Right, with this ring. I don't think they don't use the word ring in the Syrian formula, right? But right, Harei at mikudeshes li bitabazo. He is relying on money, kesef, right, an object of value to affect the kiddushin. The kiddushin is the betrothal, the acquisition, if you will, the engagement. Okay, all of those are imprecise terms. The kiddushin. Okay. That's kesef. Shtar would be harei at mikudeshes li bishtar, right? You are mikudeshes li with this shtar, with this document. And when we look at the ksuba, we'll see that there is indeed a statement of proposal within the ksuba. But it's not the document through which the betrothal, through which the kiddushin occurs. The kiddushin occurs primarily through the object of value, which is given from the man to the woman. The ksuba mentions that there are witnesses that saw the giving of an object of value, or that saw the marriage proposal being made from the man and the agreement of the woman. There are witnesses to that in the ksuba. That is included in the ksuba, but it's more of a reflective statement than it is the actual betrothal. Okay, the actual betrothal. And we spoke about the last method of betrothal, which is conjugal relationships. Okay,
But you don't have witnesses for that.
you don't have witnesses.
In other words, one of those three could facilitate a marriage, right? One of them or all of them?
No, any one of them can facilitate a marriage.
For the first two, there are witnesses.
So you're right. There are no witnesses to the actual. There are no witnesses to the actual act of sexual relationships, but there are witnesses to a seclusion of a man and a woman in a place and for a time that would allow for sexual relationships. Okay, that's what there are witnesses to. Okay, the same thing back to the ordeal of the sota, right? This miraculous kind of intervention by the sota, the witnesses did not see her engage in sexual relationships with a man. If they had, the sota process would not have started. The whole reason for the sota process is because they saw her secluded with a man for a time long enough to have engaged in sexual relationships. The Gemara, interesting, the Gemara has a whole debate about how long that is. One opinion is as long as it takes to run around a big tree. I don't know, right? Times have changed, I guess. I don't know, whatever, right? Whatever, right? But the idea behind this, right? The idea behind this is that witnessing her secluded with the man is enough to trigger off this sota ordeal, this sota process. All right. So yes. Right. Sexual relationships are a way of betrothing a woman, but we mentioned last week the debate, Rav Moshe, Rav Henkin, all of that. I don't want to go into that now. We're already way off topic. Okay. Yes. Let's go. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't understand a lot of what is in ksuba. I don't understand the wording. The mohar is not, it's not specific, it's very general.
No, it's actually very specific, and we will go through line by line the ksuba.
Are Sephardic
So-
ksubas different than?
Sephardic ksubas are significantly different than Ashkenazi ksubas. All right, and that's actually, I believe, a reflection of a change in cultural values of how women are seen between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi communities. All right, and so when we go through the ksuba, we're going to use the Ashkenazi ksuba. When we go through the ksuba, I will highlight the differences in a Sephardi ksuba. Now, again, it's interesting. Ashkenazi ksubos, there's basically one nusach for the ksuba. You might have a few variations of a nusach, but basically one nusach. When you go to Sephardi ksubos, there are multiple nuschaos, right? Multiple variations in the text of a Sephardi ksuba. So I'll try to navigate that. So number one, the ksuba is a record of indebtedness. Number two, as I just mentioned, and as I think Raylene pointed out, the ksuba is a proof of a given marriage proposal and an accepted marriage proposal. Number three, the ksuba records the obligations of a husband to his wife. What are those obligations of a husband to his wife? Where do we see anywhere the listing of obligations of a husband towards his wife? And when we talk about obligations of a husband towards his wife, right, we are talking about very specific obligations. Now, the ksuba does not contain the specificity that's behind the obligations of a husband to his wife, but the general principle is that the ksuba indeed is a document that the wife can use to enforce those obligations from her husband to her. So what's the source for the obligations of a husband towards his wife?
The source, I don't know, but the Gemara lists all these.
The Gemara records all of the obligations of a husband towards his wife, right? So it's very interestingly, we record that if a young woman were given by her father to a man to become his wife, and the man at a particular point did not want to go through with the marriage, so we are told that he can let her go, but he's not allowed to diminish his obligations to her. She'er, ksus, v'ona. 3 terms that are mentioned in Chumash as a man's obligation to his wife.
It's from the Tanakh.
From
Again?
Chumash. She'er,
Again, please.
she'er, ksus, she'er with a shin, she'er, ksus, v'onasa. Basically translating into support, financial support, to provide food for her, to provide a place for her to live, and to provide her with sexual relationships. These are all obligations of the husband to the wife. And the Gemara is filled with trying to understand, what are the specifics of these obligations? How much food is the wife entitled to? Right? In other words, right? Listen, think about this, right? Remember, we are a religion of preciseness, right? It's not sufficient to simply say the man is obligated to provide food for his wife, because who knows, right? What does that mean? Like, what does that mean? If she's going to be able to go into court and to say in front of the Beis Din, he is not sustaining me, what does that mean? Beis Din has to have some kind of standard. Does that mean 2 meals a day? Does that mean 3 meals a day? What are the components of the meals? I mean, I know this sounds trite and silly, but from a halachic perspective, this is discussed in our tradition. What is considered a meal?
But I don't understand, if the person, if he pulls out of the marriage, right, he doesn't want to get married, okay. The last one, to provide her with sexual pleasure, to me is.
We're talking about before he, in other words, after he makes his decision, but he hasn't acted on the release yet. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, not
He hasn't acted on the release yet, right? In other words, he's still bound to her until the release actually happens. That's right. That's what. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is that even if he makes the decision, but doesn't affect the release, he's still bound by these things. Which, by the way, that is the underlying assumption, the underlying foundation of a prenup. When we have a couple sign a prenup, what is that prenup essentially saying? And I guess maybe it's not a bad idea to go through a prenup as well, right? What prenup is essentially saying that until the husband agrees to a get,
Right.
he is obligated to continue his obligations of support to her. This prenup document is essentially a civil enforcement of the ksuba. That's basically what it is. Now, if the husband is wealthy, so he could theoretically continue to do this forever, right? And continue not to give her a get. That's why, it has to be construed in such a way where the husband will be disinclined to do that, right? The money is the motivation for the husband to give a get. In Israel, they have an additional tool of motivation. And what is that? Jail. Jail. If the husband refuses to give his wife a get, what can they do in Israel? Throw him into jail to motivate him to give his wife a get. Okay? So those are other elements here. Yes, Raylene?
What happens to the status of the woman? Because I thought in the biblical time, when you were engaged, that was the same as the marriage. In other words, when that couple.
The betrothal is the same as the marriage with one exception.
Okay,
And that is that the husband has the obligation to support his wife as of the moment of betrothal, but he is not allowed to live with her sexually until after the wedding.
Is she considered a divorcee when this takes place? In other words, what happens to her status
If-
from
So this is the reason why we do the betrothal and the wedding together, right? Within 5 minutes, with 10 minutes, 20 minutes, however long the rabbi talks for, right? That's why we do these things together, because we don't want to get involved in that. Because at a time, there was indeed a problem that a woman would need a get from the kiddushin, right?
even though it wasn't consummated?
Correct. The woman would need a get from the kiddushin.
What I don't
right? Marriage, it's interesting. This is a fascinating, we're way off topic, but marriage does not require consummation for the marriage to be valid. Does not require consummation for the marriage to be valid.
But it's
Okay?
one of the ways,
Correct.
one of the ways.
But it does not require consummation for the marriage to be valid. And here's a fascinating, just a fascinating social phenomenon to share with you, is that as part of rabbinic training, we are exposed to all kinds of psychological problems that could occur. One of them is based obviously on a sexual dysfunction between a husband and a wife that can create tremendous strain in a marriage. And there are observant people who are both men and women who are sexual therapists who have reported that it's not uncommon to find that in certain elements of the Jewish world, marriages were never consummated. Right? They were never consummated because there was no knowledge about how these things worked. I know that sounds challenging, difficult to believe, certainly not from the world that we're familiar with, but it happens.
And
It
they're
happens.
still married,
I'm still married.
for economic necessity or.
They're still married. No, I'm not talking about that they didn't consummate the marriage because they didn't want to consummate the marriage. They didn't consummate the marriage because they didn't know what to do to consummate the marriage, right? Whatever, right? Whatever reason. Okay, all right. So we have. So far we have the ksuba is in indebtedness. Sonia, go ahead. Sonia, this doesn't happen in Riverdale. Go ahead.
When my husband was a medical student, his father, who was a rabbi, asked him, "And what are you studying now?" And my husband said to him, "We're studying reproduction and sex, that kind of thing." So the rabbi father said to him in Yiddish, "Dem Torah kennen Allah." In other words, you don't need to be taught about that, which is actually not exactly what you're saying.
That's correct. Not at all what I'm saying. And interesting, and just interesting, as an interesting aside, I don't know how many of you remember your Kala classes, but today, every chassan class and every chassan and Kala class at the very end includes what's called, anybody know? The shmooze. Includes what's called the shmooze. All right, what is the shmooze? The shmooze is a frank discussion so that a chassan and a kala, have at least the fundamental knowledge that they need to be able to move ahead from a sexual perspective. Okay.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I thought that in the Gemara it gives descriptions of that there's Gemara on how a man determines if a woman is ready to accept him, and no.
You want to be more specific? No, don't be more specific, right? Don't be more specific. We'll stop it at that. There are I'm not exactly sure, and that might be better. But basically, what Beverly is suggesting is that there are within the Gemara, there are discussions about the nature of sexual relationships, right? Within the Gemara, right? Okay, right, we can without going into the specifics. Okay, so here's the following. Okay, here's the following. If you brought your ksuba, and if you don't mind, because I was hoping we would get to a line by line today, let me take a picture of your ksuba, and this way you don't have to schlep it next time, or right? Or if you don't want me to take a picture of it, right? So then, if you take a picture of it, I can show it as a screenshot next week. And if not, then, schlep it again and you could just go over it.
Isn't the wording the same? Isn't the wording the same? Would you
Well, the wording is basically the same, assuming that we're all talking about Ashkenazi ksubos, but there are some interesting differences which we can highlight. All right, we'll stop here for today. Everybody have a great day.
How do we buy a man?
What? How do you buy the man? That's next week.